So, the skeleton. The skeletal system has our bones and cartilage that we find supporting our joints and between joints. So let's talk about that. The human skeleton initially is composed of just cartilage, and it gets replaced by bone throughout most of the skeleton. And we'll talk about the two ways that our bones grow in a little bit. So as far as just reviewing things that your book goes over, skeletal cartilage is made of highly resilient, molded cartilage tissue that consists primarily of water. Cartilage contains no blood vessels or nerves. Some things to be aware of, we're going to see perichondrium, periosteum. Peri means around, chondros referring to cartilage. So the perichondrium is a layer of dense connective tissue that surrounds our cartilage like a girdle. It helps to resist outward expansion. This is what's going to contain the blood vessels for the nutrient delivery to the cartilage. So if we look at cartilage, the cells, the resident cells we talked about when we talked about connective tissues or chondrocytes, they get encased in little spaces called lacuna, and their extracellular matrix is pretty thick and viscous. So as far as what do we need to worry about, we are going to look at our cartilages today. We didn't worry about that when we went over connective tissues because we're going to worry about that now. So we've got three types of cartilage that we'll find associated with our skeleton and our bones. Hyaline cartilage is the most abundant. And so generally, anytime you have the most of something, it's, I don't know, I always think most abundant, most important. That might not necessarily be true, but hyaline cartilage is super strong. It gives good kind of strength to joints. It covers the ends of our long bones in joint cavities to make them smooth. And so we find it as what we call articular cartilage. So it forms the articular cartilage that covers the ends of long bones in joints. We also find it as what are called your costal cartilages that attach your ribs to your sternum. So these are costal cartilages. Our hyaline cartilage. Your nose is hyaline cartilage. Not your nasal bones, those are bones. But here on the front, this wiggly part is hyaline cartilage. So you can see hyaline cartilage is here in blue. We find it on the ends of our bones and joints. We find it as our costal cartilages. We find it in the nose. So this is also showing you this, like in the joint we have articular cartilage. Articulations are joints. So our hyaline cartilage covering the ends of our bones is what we call articular cartilage. So that's what we can say about that. As far as ways to distinguish it histologically, its extracellular matrix is pretty amorphous, they say. It's hard to see any real distinct collagen fibers or elastic fibers in it. You can kind of see wispy looking stuff. It looks kind of glassy. So for identifying, we could say it kind of looks glassy with amorphous extracellular matrix. The chondrocytes are entrapped in nice, really distinct lacuna. So our chondrocytes are visible in our lacuna.
What is that word right after glassy?
Amorphous, like without like the distinct shape. It's kind of like that. When you look at hyaline cartilage compared to the other types of cartilage, it makes it really clear because the other types of cartilage have very distinct features. Elastic cartilage has a ton of elastic fibers, and elastic fibers stain very black, and they're stringy. So it's very easy to see elastic cartilage. So that's our next type of cartilage, is elastic. And so as far as distinguishing features, we could just say that it has an increased proportion of elastic fibers, which gives it what? Elasticity. Elasticity is the ability to be flexible and bounce back, right? So I find elastic cartilage in places that I need to be able to be strong and flexible, but maintain their shape. So my external ear is elastic cartilage. This thing called my epiglottis and my larynx is elastic cartilage. So elastic cartilage we see here in green. And your epiglottis is this thing that flops down over your larynx while you're swallowing so that food doesn't go into your respiratory system. Yeah?
I'm sorry, but it said chronocytes visible in, what is that?
It's lacuna, L-A-C-U-N-A-E. So elastic cartilage we find in the epiglottis and the external ear. And in both of those places it's able to maintain shape but be flexible. So we'll say it gives flexibility but maintains shape. So we find that in two places, our epiglottis and our external ear. Is everybody good on hyaline cartilage? Okay, our last type of cartilage is fibrocartilage. And fibrocartilage is distinct because it is arranged, it has a lot of collagen fibers in it that are arranged in a really regular fashion, similar to how they're arranged in dense regular connective tissue. So what that does is allows fibrocartilage to resist a bunch of compressive tension. So it can withstand compression because of the regular arrangement of its collagen fibers. So fibrocartilage is our last type. And what's different about it is that it's got a high proportion of collagen fibers that are arranged in a regular fashion. What does that mean? Well, they're parallel to each other. They're going to be squashed together, and then we'll still see our chondrocytes entrapped in our lacuna. So we'll say our collagen fibers are densely packed in parallel. Or we'll just say densely packed in a regular fashion. And what this does is allows you to resist compression. So fibrocartilage really resists compression. And if we look at where we find it in the skeleton, it makes a lot of sense that it is composed of this stuff, and it does that. So we find fibrocartilage in 3 locations as our intervertebral discs between our vertebrae, between our vertebral bodies. So it's here in red on this figure. And remember, we have different parts of the vertebrae, the weight-bearing parts of the bodies in the anterior aspect. And in between them, we have pads of fibrocartilage that resist the compression of your vertebral column. We also find pads of fibrocartilage in what we call the meniscus of the knee. It's a pad of fibrocartilage in this joint. The knee joint is the most complex synovial joint in your body because there are lots of bones coming together in it, lots of little joints in it. But what's cool about it is that when it locks, we can just lock it and take all of the work off the muscles. So it can hold the compression force of your body all day long because those meniscus are kind of taking all of that compressive weight from your body onto your femur and holding that before, like taking the pressure off before we relay that foot to the tibia. So that's our second place. And then the third place that we find it here is in our pubic symphysis, which we find between the pubis bones of our os coxa. Any questions on cartilages? All right, so as far as cartilage goes, we're not going to worry about going over the nitty-gritty details of cartilage growth, other than defining just what these 2 types of growth mean. And the reason we're not going to go over the nitty-gritty details of cartilage growth is because really cartilage growth primarily occurs in utero, and then most of that cartilage is overtaken by bone. So we're going to go over the nitty-gritty details of bone growth. So for cartilage growth and for bone growth, we grow in 2 ways: by appositional growth, or growth in width. So for appositional growth, this is growth in width, and what happens is we lay down new cartilage on old cartilage because of that perichondrium. So appositional growth, this is growth in width, and we could say that the perichondrium lays new cartilage outside of old cartilage. Or outside of older cartilage. The second way we can grow in cartilage and bone is what we call interstitially. Interstitial growth is growth in length. So this happens as our chondrocytes divide and push out and push up and trap themselves in a lacuna and surround extracellular matrix. So you have interstitial growth kind of happening up as appositional growth is happening around. So the second type is interstitial growth, and this is growth in length. And here our chondrocytes divide. And secrete extracellular matrix. So they kind of grow up and out. So they push away from each other and then trap themselves in the lacuna, and that's how we're growing up. Does that make sense? If I've got these two chondrocytes, well, it was one chondrocyte, and then we divide by mitosis, and now each of them starts secreting its own extracellular matrix. It pushes up and away from each other. They entrap themselves in protein fibers and ground substance, and now they're each in their own lacuna. So that what I did is I started here and I split each cell, kind of entrapped itself in its own lacuna, and it split apart that way. That's what's happening on the inside of our mold. On the outside, we're laying down new cartilage cells around all of that. So interstitial growth